Welcome to Now You See TV. I'm your host, Jake Grant, and I'm really excited to invite Ali Siadatan back to the show. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to interview him, and tonight we're going to be talking about the throne of Satan. And the description that Ali sent over to me was back to the show. Oh, excuse me, guys. It looks like I got a little bit of feedback here. All right. The description Ali sent over to me was, mysteriously, as the altar of Pergamum is unearthed and reassembled in Berlin, we see the rise of dark spiritual forces in the industrial world. Few have noticed that this altar is called the throne of Satan by the Lord himself in the book of Revelation. Now, we're going to join Ali tonight as he dives into the history of the altar of Pergamum, this seat of Satan, and he reveals the dark and mysterious history behind this unholy seat and how it is connected to end times events and the prophetic implications of this seat of Satan. So I'm really excited. So welcome back to the show, Ali. It's great to have you.
Good to be here, Jake.
Yeah, it's always good to have you on the show. Like I said, this is the first opportunity I've had to interview you personally, so I've been really looking forward to this. So let's talk the seat of Satan and really what is this altar of Pergamum that we see talked about in the book of Revelation?
Yes, I'm looking forward to it as well. Yeah, let's dive right into it. For me, it started with a story in my own personal life. It was 1996, and I was walking up to my teacher with whom I was studying the Word of God. The Lord had brought me this gentleman. As I walked up the stairs, he looked at me and he said, "I know where the throne of Satan is." And I thought, "What?" He said, "I know where the throne of Satan is." And I said, "Oh, really? Well, where is it?" And he then simply opened the Bible and read from the letter that was written to the congregation of Pergamum by the Lord himself. He said, "It's in Pergamum." I'm like, "Where's Pergamum?" He says, "Well, the Lord says it's in Pergamum." So he opened up the book of Revelation. There are 7 letters in the book of Revelation tucked away that were written actually by the Lord himself. Some theologians call them the Christine letters as opposed to the Pauline letters. The idea is that, the Lord himself wrote 7 letters, and he wrote it through his disciple John, who penned it for him, and he sent a messenger from the court of heaven, where he's at the right hand of God. He sent a messenger to the island of Patmos, where John, Yohanan, the fisherman from Galilee, who we believe was like the bishop of these 7 congregations, and exiled by Rome, not killed like other apostles were, exiled to the island of Patmos. To this day, you can go down, and the Greek Orthodox Church guards this place. It's called the Grotto of Revelation. It's a very good chance that that was really the cave that he lived in. In there, an angel visits him, and a message is given, which apparently was given by God, by the Father, to the Son. That's how the book of Revelation begins. It is a communique from, the one who inhabits eternity to his Son. So this is of the highest order, and it's the only book of the Bible that has a blessing, by the way, to those who hear it and those who read it. So this is a blessing to us to actually be, talking about this right now. And so here, the book begins with 7 letters written to these 7 congregations in Asia Minor, and Asia Minor is by the Aegean Sea. If you go north and turn left, you'll be in Greece, and you'll have, the ancient Greek cities, kind of the cradle of Western civilization. But actually, the cradle of Western civilization also went down the Aegean coast. It was like, kind of like a little hat. And here was this city called Pergamum, which was one of these 7 cities that the Lord has congregations in that he decides to write to. Today it falls in Turkey. That's the country it falls in today. But that's not really important for us, actually, in this conversation. It's just a point of reference. And so to the letter to the church in Pergamum, he says, oh, sorry, I got something from Apple. Okay. He says, Revelation chapter 2, verse 12, to the angel of Messiah's community in Pergamum write, thus says the one who has the sharp 2-edged sword, I know where you live, where Satan's throne is. Yet You continue to hold firm to my name, and you do not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells. So it's very interesting that the Lord suddenly, is talking about this particular congregation in Pergamum, and suddenly the conversation turns to, oh, this is the throne of Satan. This is where Satan dwells. This is where he has his throne. And this is where, who was Antipas? Antipas was the bishop of the congregation. He was the leader of the congregation of that city. There was only one church. Everyone belonged to it, one body, and he was the leader. And he was arrested by the polytheists because he was a monotheist, and that was not acceptable. The gods were the backbone of imperial power, and he was rebelling against this order with his monotheism. He was arrested, and he was offered as a burnt offering in this altar that existed in that city, a very famous altar. People sacrifices to be offered as burnt offering in the fire that was in the middle of that Roman world. It was functioning 7 days a week, 24 hours. The most important altar to the father of the gods, the king of the gods that governed the Greco-Roman world, Zeus or Jupiter. So this is, they had a brazen bull, made of bronze, a bull of bronze, and they would put people in as sacrifices to Zeus. They put Antipas in there, and then they light a fire underneath you. As the bronze gets warm, it kind of cooks you. And they've put this gizmo inside of it, like a tube, so that the moans and groans of the dying person are amplified through the mouth of the bull. It's as though the bull comes to life. And they put Antipas in there, and then, they cook him, they sacrifice him to Zeus. And apparently, it is recorded in the historical writings that he prayed till the moment of his death for his congregation as their leader. And that's what he offered out of the mouth of that bull. And so the Lord mentions him. He's of mention, worthy to mention by God, where my faithful servant, my martyr Antipas was. And so this is kind of this letter going, and it's like, okay, well, what is the city? We've never heard of it, and suddenly the throne of Satan is inside of here. I happen to be a graduate student at the University of Toronto here in 1996. I was doing a master's degree in French language and literature, and I decided, okay, well, I'm going to go to this library and look it up, because what is in the city of Pergamum of importance that the Lord may have been pointing to? So I go look it up, and eventually I find out that I should go to the Library of Archaeology. So I go there, and what I see is that, I find this book, and it's the excavations of this ancient city, Pergamum. And there's Carl Humann. He's an archaeologist, a German-Prussian archaeologist, and he's discovered this thing called the Altar of Zeus. And it says in his own handwriting in the notes in the book I was looking at that if there was anything that Christ may have been referring to, a possibility that could be this throne of Satan, it would have been this altar. He writes that himself. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. So I photocopy that, and I run back to my teacher, and I say, you know what? The archaeologist who dug up the city of Pergamum agrees with you, Carl Humann. Apparently, there is an altar there to Zeus that could be, in fact, what the Lord is referring to. And so this led us to understanding the relationship between the gods of the nations, the Elohim of the Goyim, and God, the God of gods, that these guys were actually real spiritual beings. And this was, in the late 90s, and this was a revelation that was coming. I didn't realize it, but I see it now from the Lord. The eyes were being opened to all of these passages that had been deemed as mythology in the scripture, because, well, if the altar of Zeus was the throne of Satan, well, then Zeus was the head of the pantheon of the gods, and therefore there was a relationship between the gods and the fallen angels, and that had led us down a whole research that's in my documentary, UFOs, Angels, and Gods. But that's not what I'm here to talk about, altar itself. So I made this documentary, and we also mentioned the altar and kind of how the Lord used it to open our mind into who the gods were according to the Word of God. And the documentary came out in 2006, and I was walking in the street, and I walked into a bookstore, and I bought this magazine, Biblical Archaeology, and I don't know if people can see it. On it, it says Satan's Throne. And this was the year the documentary came out. I was like, is this really from God? And this was 2006, and it was a confirmation suddenly. Wow, this is the altar of Zeus, and on it says Satan's throne. So I bought this magazine, and there's a woman from Yale, a professor, who's saying that yes, possibly this was what Jesus was referring to, because this was the only thing of great, importance in that city, of spiritual importance, of dark spiritual importance. And so it confirmed the fact that Zeus and Satan were being equated by the Lord himself. This was a huge, huge insight. The Lord was identifying suddenly, it seems, Zeus as, in fact, the Nachash, the serpent. And that's it's very interesting, because if you look at the name Jupiter, which was the way the Greeks understood him, the Romans called him, they called him Jupiter. Jupiter, actually, Jupiter, is said Dufter. That's how they said it, Dufter. And it's derived from the root diu, which means to shine. And that's what Nachash actually means in Hebrew. It means the shining one, which is the name given in the book of Genesis to the one that we know as Satan, the accuser in English. He's the serpent. It's translated as serpent. So there's an interesting, connection there as well. And, there was all these verses from, let's say, the book of Deuteronomy that said that in Deuteronomy 32, verse 8 and 9, that when God divided the nations, he divided them according to the number of the sons of God. And Israel, Jacob, he took as his own inheritance. So suddenly there was these sons of God that were behind the nations. All this was coming to life. And the altar was confirmed by this magazine. And so now, of late, the Lord has really brought my attention back to this altar. I'm looking much more deeply into it, and that's what I'm here to share. Why is it that this altar is interesting, and does it have a connection to the throne of Satan, as we see in the book of Revelation, as the Lord alludes to it? Well, first of all, let's take a 30,000 feet view of where the altar is. What do we see from the sky? What we see is a mountain, on the top of the Mount of Pergamum. And there is a palace for the kings of Pergamum, the Atelier dynasty. And then there is a smaller temple to Athena, the goddess of war. Then there's a library, which Plutarch says had 200,000 tablets. They also had parchments. And only second to the Library of Alexandria. And of course, there was a knowledge of civilization, of pagan civilization. And then at the top of the hill, the altar to Zeus. This was the bird's eye view: the king's palace, Artemis, the library, and the altar of Zeus. And in this place, it's very interesting. All the elements are there of kind of like worldly power. Military might. Artemis is the goddess of war. She gives incredible victories. There's, of course, the one who has received power. He's in the spirit of the temptation of the Lord. I have dominion over all the nations, and I'll give power to whoever I want. I'll give authority to whoever I want. I'll give it to you if you worship me. It's written, only worship the Lord your God. The Lord responds to that. So he has this power, and so you have this kingly power of authority, and you have war, and then you have the knowledge of civilization, which we know, going back to the book of Enoch and to the 7 angels that pass knowledge down, that knowledge, this is the type of knowledge that is, in fact, worldly. It's sciences, yes, but it's also worldview, is the worship of the gods, is knowledge that gives strength to this empire that the enemy is building. And so Zeus is then presented there as the main spiritual force overseeing this whole, interconnection. They're all pathways that connect the king to the priests, to the library, to the altar of Zeus. And you really kind of see the world, depicted right there. And when you zoom into the altar, what you see is very interesting. And I'm going to describe it to you in a second. But moving forward, we see this whole picture, shaping up where the altar is buried, and suddenly it finds itself unearthed in the late 19th century, in the 1880s, by this Prussian-German archaeologist who's an engineer, Carl Cuban. He brings it to Germany. There's a whole, spiritual movement being birthed in Germany. Madame Blavatsky is very crucial, this Russian, German, Ukrainian woman. And the spirituality that comes eventually, of course, leads to the Nazis. There's this dark force, this alternative spirituality that's emerging. At the same time, this altar is found, and these guys say, you know what, we can't just show this in a museum piece by piece. We want to reassemble it in proportion as it is there. We want to put it in a train, bring it here, and reassemble it. It's the first time any archaeological find is decided that must be displayed as is. It's the first time. Until then, you would just take a piece of it and put it on a wall next to a wall. The rest would be in storage. You would recycle it maybe. But this is the first time they say we're going to. So they built this museum for it, which actually looks like a temple. If you Google the Museum of Pergamum, you'll see it kind of looks like a temple. Then they put this altar in it. And there, the architect of Hitler walks in. And he has a look at it, Albert Speer, and he's inspired. Oh, I'm so inspired by this thing. And so he decides he's going to build a big version of it for Hitler. And they put it in Nuremberg, where all the, crazy Nuremberg rallies happen. And they're all, it's like a cathedral of lights. It's a very, they put lights around it. Hitler says, I want it to be like a solemn, like a Catholic mass. And he puts these, lights all around it. And then they light it up at night and it looks like pillars. And suddenly the soldiers at night, it was all at night. You couldn't see him. He couldn't see you. He said, I feel you and you feel me, but we can't see each other, with torches and fire. I mean, it was this crazy. You got to look at this thing. And then there's this altar, but like a huge, gigantic version of it. And where the bull was, where Antipas was offered, there Speer puts a podium with a microphone for Hitler to talk from, where the bull was. And from there, it is from that altar that Hitler declares a burnt offering, as we say in Greek, Holocaust. He declares it from there, another burnt offering. And so this thing, is very strange. Then, the Soviets come and they take East Berlin, and this thing was in East Berlin. That's where the museum, Das Pergamon was. And then it becomes part of the Russians. And, Rabbi Jonathan Kahn, who you can Google, talk about this better than me. He's talking about all of the modern implications of that, of the finding of that altar. And he says, the Russians took it, and next thing, what emerges out of Russia? Well, a Soviet atheist force that makes war against, the word of God and imposes atheism on all the cultures. It conquers. I'm not saying the West is perfect, but I'm just saying that this was a reality. Here, there was this, you can, if you want to believe in it. I don't have to, but you can. There was like, no, the state says there is no God. And so this thing is there, and they decide, well, we're going to take it to Moscow. They grab it from Berlin, and they take the altar to Moscow. Eventually, it's returned to Berlin, and, the Soviet thing falls down, and now that's where it sits. And there's lots of interesting things that come into play as this altar comes. There's the beginning of anti-Semitism and the pogroms in Russia that start virtually at the same time. There's two world wars, that emerge, World War I and World War II. And there's a goddess of war. The Temple of Artemis was there first. And I'll show you the war theme is very big in Pergamum. And it's not just authority, spiritual authority, but it's also this war spirit. And now it sits there. And then President Obama decides, I'm going to go to Berlin. And he's there to do a speech. And he's kind of walking up the street where the speech is going to happen. And I guess they're going to this museum. It's a very important museum. He sees the altar and he's like, this is so inspiring to me. I love it. He says, I would like to make my inauguration speech from this altar. And if you Google 2008 Obama, you'll see he's doing his inauguration speech from this altar. And so, some say, well, he really rolled back the Judeo-Christian values of the culture and replaced, made the culture more open to a different type of reality. And I'm going to come back to this because I think there's propheticness here. And that the Word of God really clearly talks about using this altar and all that happened between Zeus and Jupiter and Jerusalem.
Ali, just real quickly, some people in the chat are saying, we love what you're saying. Please say it a little bit slower so we can catch it all. Okay. Just slow down.
Thank you for that feedback. I'm happy that you interrupted me. I apologize. Yeah, sometimes I can start talking very fast. So I was just kind of giving a bird's eye view as I'm about to start from the beginning, kind of build it up so that we see that, this altar, I'm going to show it more clearly, the role it played in the ancient world, but this idea of it emerging is interesting. It reappears on the scene of history, and we witnessed 2 world wars. We witnessed the Holocaust. There's a Hitler connection to it. The Soviets take it. Obama asks for it. It's just, it's crazy, this thing. And it emerges at the time of a spiritualism, it's called, I guess, in Europe, that emerged at the end of the 19th century. From there, we begin to see the rise of this very dark spirituality that's very, very powerful, very, very well connected. And it channels things, and it changes the world, and it leads us to the Führer eventually, their chosen guy. We love this guy. Yes, this is going to. And so it's very interesting that Aleister Crowley. This is kind of the bird's eye. Back to the beginning of our tale. Where's Pergamum? Well, it's very interesting because when you look at it from our view, it just seems like it's some small town in some backwater place. But if you went back to the Roman world, who was aware of the Greek world that was before it, and if you went back to the Greek world and you now stood there, let's say, for instance, in 300s BC, so some 2,300 years ago, if you stood there, what you would see is that there's a new reality emerging. The Persian Empire has been conquered by Alexander the Great, and something west of Persia, which is immediately the Asia Minor, where Turkey is, where Pergamum is, there, and a few cities from Greece, like Athens and around there, from Asia Minor and Athens. It's the bubbling wells of something new, of new civilization. It is the beginnings of the Western world. So you would see that Pergamum is one of the most ancient and first cities of the Western civilization. It is a father city, and the people in the Greek world and in Asia Minor and the Romans, they were all, I realize now, very aware and respectful of that. Everyone knew Pergamum had a library with 200,000 tablets, only second to Alexandria, the greatest library of the entire world. This was only second to that. Its palace, you can look at the archaeological remains. It was sumptuous. Its wealth, and of course, its incredible altar. So here is the beginnings of the dream. We see in the book of Daniel, in chapter 10, that this angel comes to speak to Daniel and says, 21 days ago when you prayed to me, well, God responded, but it took that long for me to get to you because as I was on my way, the prince of Persia withstood me for 21 days, and I had to call for backup. Michael came, your prince, the protector of Israel. And so I came to talk to you, and after I have to go, and he says, fight with the prince of Greece. Of course, Daniel, who was living in the Babylonian and partly Persian kingdom, for him, Greece, he would be long dead before Greece or Alexander or anything. But this angel is all telling him that for Persia, there is another prince rising. And so what we see is right where the territory of the Prince of Persia ends, a new civilization begins. And so the chief deity, the chief spiritual force of that civilization is putting his foundation stone down. He's putting it's like he's in his backyard, standing in the city of Pergamum, looking west, and he's seeing perhaps the glory of what his empire. How far he sees, I don't know. Does he see just the Greek world? Does he see the Roman world? These guys live long times. They have different minds. Does he see all the way to Washington, D.C. and to the shores of California? How forward does he see in time? I don't know. Is this why the Lord said to Paul, go west through Macedon and Messianic Judaism, this new way of the Messiah suddenly poured into the West? Is it because this was going to be the throne, the territory that the fallen angel, the chief one, has taken for himself, and so this is where the Holy Spirit was needed? Is it because the Holy Spirit was going to hear that Satan decides, I'm really going to put my foot down here, where all the other great cities, Jerusalem is destroyed, and all the great centers of the followers of Yeshua fall to Islam, only Rome stands after all. And so is this the West? Is this where? So if you stood, I don't know how far Satan could see, but if you stood in Sea of Pergamum, you would now be at the very beginning, at the very foundation of the Western world. And this was a very important city, and it was not lost on the Greco-Roman world as it is on us. So there's got to be this, like, putting ourselves back in the shoes of like who these guys were, and how they saw Pergamum. Now, what's interesting is if we kind of go to the picture, I'm going to share a picture for your viewers. Okay. And do you see this?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So if we go back and now in the city, this is what I mean. There's the palace of the king right here. This is the temple of Artemis. And in reverence, it's aligned directly with the center of the altar where the burnt offerings were given. And so here, if this is what the Lord is referring to, in fact, if this is really, this great spiritual thing, the father of the gods, he's here. And ironically, these arms, you see the arms of the altar, where actually they are looking exactly west. If you stood right here and looked out, you would be looking west. You would be looking towards this, the territory of the Prince of Greece, I guess. And and people can Google the Altar of Pergamum and look what's on it. I can Google it for you. So what's on it is this battle of the Titans and the gods. And so what is depicted is that these hybrid offsprings of the gods that scripture refers to as the Nephilim, these guys, they are risen against the order of the gods and of men, and they're being very mean. And the gods, under the leadership of Zeus, who's presented in a very lofty way here inside of this altar, he's slaying one god with one titan with one hand, another one with another. He's got his bolt of lightning. He's the just. He's the father of the gods, and he's bringing justice by destroying the titans and bringing order. Now that's very interesting because that's what's depicted on the outside of this altar. The battle of the gods and the titans and the saving of mankind by the will of Zeus. What's interesting is because this is a reversal of scriptural reality. What the Bible teaches is that actually it was the sons of God, which I guess we often call fallen angels, even though that word doesn't exist in the scriptures. It's a word of Christian culture. The Bnei HaElohim, the sons of God, is what they're called in the Bible. And so these guys, apparently, they are under the leadership of Satan. 1/3 have the angels have gone with him. And so here, these guys are actually the ones that create these troublemakers, these Nephilim kings, and create a whole one world government and empire in the ancient world that God judges by the waters of the flood. And God is the one, of course, that reestablishes order. Here, we have a reversal of that biblical history. Zeus is the one that is establishing order. And so he is the father of civilization. He is the one that brings justice and light and order to the world through the vehicle of these empires, the Greek world, the Roman world, the peace of Rome, Pace Romana. The Rome comes and it brings its peace, its civilization under its god, Jupiter. And so what we've got here is, how do I come out of this? Okay, sorry. What we have here is a reversal of biblical reality. The people who designed this magnificent sculptings on here, there were 4 artists, and their names are carved, and we have their names. Some are fully legible, some are not. And they carved this historical thing for them, where their leader is the savior of the world, and he is the one that brings kingship, rulership, and justice. So there's a clear competition with the throne of David and with the Temple of Jerusalem. The source of light is shifted and the source of power is shifted. Now, when you zoom into the altar itself and you go into the middle of it here, what you see on top of here is on the walls of this burning place is the story of Telephus. Telephus is the son of Hercules, the son of Zeus, and Nephilim bloodline. And the story of his life is here, and he's the founder of Pergamum. Traditional historians will say the mythological founder, but for those of us who believe literally in the story of the Nephilim and in the Bible, it's not it's not a mythology. This goes back to the age of the Nephilim, and there is the bloodline of Zeus, the serpent seed, that is the founding, of the city of Pergamum. That is the history of Pergamum as understood by the Greeks and Romans. And that is recorded right here. So by presenting himself as the king of the gods and the ruler of empire, here Zeus is making a declaration that is political, that competes with the line of David. And so I think that's why the Lord calls it the throne of Satan, because there's actually a political statement of the royalness of Zeus is what is being kind of alluded to here as him being the one that brings order out of the chaos and kickstarts civilization again and rules it. And then his bloodline, we know that the Antichrist, sort of the final world leader, or the seer, whatever you want to call him, that the son of perdition, that the Lord humbles at his coming, will be a Nephilim. And again, if you look at our documentary, UFOs, Angels, and Gods, the second half really deals with, in detail, the creation of modern day hybrids, and with lots of pictures drawn by abductees. It's I think, very interesting, and ties into biblical prophecy. So there's the bloodline here of Nephilim. There's a political statement. There's this massive ancient city, one of the founding cities of the Western world, and one of the first cities of the territory of the Prince of Greece. Yes, the Romans, the Greeks,
I know in
they
modern
value them.
the Greeks, their history would be looked at today as mythology, but they viewed it as their actual literal history.
That's why all of these Roman citizens who became Christians were killed, because they were no longer sacrificing to the gods. The gods were understood by the majority of the Roman world as being the source of imperial power, going all the way back to the first cities of Mesopotamia, where it says that in the oldest of the records of kings, the Sumerian king list, that Enlilship or kingship descended from heaven to earth in the city of Eridu before the flood and Kish after the flood. And from then on, it was understood that the gods gave the scepter of rule. And so if you did not sacrifice the gods, you were weakening the emperor. And that's why citizens were arrested who refused to do that, who were now followers of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who now were monotheists, and they didn't do this, and so they were rounded and killed. And again, we talk about this when we look at the gods. In the documentary, we talk about Apollo and the great persecution in the 4th century. It's fascinating. So here, in Pergamum, we have the seat of authority and this incredible altar that had sacrifices 24/7. It was considered the most important altar to the head of the pantheon, which the Lord identifies as the Nachash, the serpent. So this city, in its architecture, tells a story of worldly rule, the seat of power, and then the goddess of war. That's a big part of it. On the outside, on the outer wall of the altar, is recorded the victories of the Atelier dynasty, which has incredible victories that are just surprising. They destroy all their enemies, especially the Gauls, who were very powerful, and the defeat of the Gauls at the Caiaphas River was what sealed their power. And the Gauls had a very famous two-edged sword made of this metal uniquely theirs. that has a two-edged sword. He's, I think, alluding and saying, there's a power even greater than all of this, and that's his. And so going back, when Telephus, this is the story of Telephus, the grandson of Zeus, he gets there, Artemis shelters him, and raises him, the goddess of war, and gives him incredible victories. And the Atelier dynasty continues to also have those victories. So war is a theme. And when you look at the Temple of Pergamum in modern day, after it's unearthed, as I said, we see the rise of the First World War, the Second World War, and the huge contention between the Soviet Empire and the West, which it happened before our time, so we may not really quite appreciate how tense it was. I mean, look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I think Rabbi Jonathan Cahn also talks about this. And so it's very interesting, this theme of war that we see recorded in the history of the athlete, and this history, Artemis, the god of strategic war. So all of these elements that are on the temple, on the Mount of Pergamum, it seems there was really a design, a spiritual design, a mastermind behind it. The themes, they echo what the Bible says about the ambitions of Satan in Isaiah chapter 14, about he wants to be above the stars of God. He wants to be like the Most High. He wants to be worshipped. He wants to be the number one authority. This idea that he says to the Lord, I can give authority to whomever I will. There's his grandson there. There's these great kings there. There's, he's not just the god of Pergamum, he's the god of Athens, he's the god of Rome, he's the god of the Greco-Roman emperors. And so this thing is all there. And then the pagan knowledge from this incredible library. When the Library of Alexandria burns down, Mark Antony offers as a gift to Cleopatra hundreds of thousands of tablets from this library, and civilizations reseeded in Alexandria. So this is like it's like storage. Let's, if that knowledge is lost, let's make sure this alternative worldview is well and alive and a source of power, because there's power in knowledge. Architecture, astronomy, military power, spiritual power, medicine, alchemy, all kinds of things. Look at what has been released in the past 100 years, 120 years. Again, corresponding, the end of the 19th century was released because knowledge started to also increase. Look at the knowledge we've had just in the 20th century, going from horse buggies to landing on the moon, apparently.
Ali, would you say following the destruction of the library at Alexandria, that this library in Pergamum was one that kind of could compete in size? Because I know the library at Alexandria was enormous. Was this library at Pergamum in existence simultaneous, or did it predate the Alexandrian library?
It existed simultaneously. Whether it predated or not, I have to look that up. But it existed simultaneously. It was the second largest library of the world, the Library of Pergamum, after Alexandria.
Okay.
According to Plutarch, it had 200,000 tablets in it and many parchments. And so the Egyptians wrote on papyrus. In Pergamum, they wrote on parchment. And the Romans liked that because it gave them another way of writing that didn't make them dependent on the Egyptian papyrus. Mm-hmm. And so it was all the elements of worldly rule are there. Now let's follow the story. Well, what happens when finally this, Alexander's empire grows, the first of this, Zeusian empires? It breaks down, it conquers the Persian Empire, then it breaks down after Alexander's death into 4. And this is prophesied in incredibly mind-boggling detail beforehand in the book of Daniel. And then Daniel focuses on this character, Antiochus Epiphanes, we discover is his name, and he is the one that makes the temple desolate. And Daniel says that there'll be the abomination of desolation. The temple will be made desolate for 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years. And this is kind of the foundation prophecy that gives us an understanding into the 3.5 years, which will repeat also in the very end of history, right before the coming of the Lord, the Great Tribulation, some call it. So, but this is where we get it from. This is where it appears the first time, this concept of 3.5 years of this desolation of the temple. So in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, whose name means, like God, like he saw himself as a God figure, he takes over Israel, and what he does is he destroys the possibility of sacrificing to God by coming into the Holy of Holies. He kind of starts to create this cultural change. He tells people, let's put away the God of Israel, let's sacrifice to the gods of Greece. And many people apparently in Israel do, because it is a time where Israel has become very Hellenized. They speak Greek, they wear togas, they do the Greek thing. And there, even the priesthood, some agree. But there are, of course, some that don't. The family of Maccabee that doesn't is the one that rebels against all of this. So what does Antiochus do? He sacrifices a pig, swine, on the mercy seat, and then he erects a altar to Zeus, where in the Holy of Holies, where God's presence would descend on the Day of Atonement until the time of the Babylonian exile. And this makes the temple desolate. No more sacrifice can be made to God. This is the abomination of desolation. Daniel's talking about it. So this empire of Zeus's eventually, as it grows, takes its hand against where the light of God is shining at that point in the whole world, the only place, the Temple of Jerusalem. He comes down and he says, okay, we're going to stop the worship of the God of gods. There's a rebellion, and when the Maccabees are able to restore order and miraculously their little ragtag team of hillbillies, essentially, because they're in the hills of Jerusalem, are fighting the mighty phalanxes of the Greek army. They come down from the hills, they ambush them, and they hit them. They stab them in the side, because these guys walk with their shields in front of them in formation. They can't just turn. These guys have more of a guerrilla warfare freedom to them. They leave, they're defeated, and the temple is rededicated to God. And this is the Hanukkah, and this is the feast of dedication. The light of God shines once again among the nations. But there's a battle with Zeus here that we have to understand. And this battle with Zeus and his chosen general, Antiochus Epiphanes, is now, we see, a type of what is to come. Why? The Lord, right out of sight, he points to the abomination of desolation mentioned by Daniel, and he says, when you see this, flee Jerusalem. He suddenly takes something where everyone believed it already happened in the Greek period that Daniel had prophesied about, and he says, well, actually, this is about the future. It's going to happen again. It's a pattern, and it's going to have one more manifestation. And now suddenly the past becomes a window into the future for us, this particular age, where the story of Hanukkah occurs. And so this empire of Zeus that begins in the Asia Minor, in cities like Pergamum, eventually leads to this particular confrontation. And what happens in the time of Rome? Well, eventually the temple is actually destroyed by Rome in 70 AD. And so the Jupiter is relentless. Eventually, Jerusalem is called Aelina Capitolina, which means the city of the Capitoline gods. And an altar to Jupiter, a temple to Jupiter, is built on the Temple Mount, where the Golden Dome, the Mosque of the Golden Dome is. And if you look at I've read that the reason it's octagonal, the base of that mosque, is because that is actually the temple of Jupiter stood and had an octagonal base. And so when the Muslims took over in the 7th century and they destroyed, what was there from Jupiter, they put their own mosque to Allah, and they put it according to the same, architecture of Jupiter. It's still there. There's this attempt, and a prophecy says that he eventually will enter Jerusalem, and he will stand in the temple of God, and he will declare himself above all that is God. And so, will there be a third temple for him to do that? It's possible. Who would have ever thought that, Jerusalem would be on the minds of people again, not just in some ancient book, gathering dust on our bookshelves, but on CNN. Who would have ever thought that? Once again, their Jews are there, and there's this whole thing happening there. And so it's possible that there might be a third temple. Who is to say there can't be? There's a huge effort by a small but determined to make it so. The Temple Institute, you can Google it, they've rebuilt all of the artifacts needed for sacrifice, the clothing of the priests. I mean, it's incredible what these guys have done. It's possible. We'll have to wait. We got front row seats, so there's no worries. We can relax and watch this whole thing unfold. So suddenly the altar of Zeus reappears at the time where the world is about to enter all of these end times, we believe. And is that a coincidence? I don't think so, because the Lord says that the throne of Satan is in Pergamum, and he must have been talking about this altar. It was Zeus, Jupiter, the sea, this altar. These are very important things in the spiritual landscape of the world of Yeshua, of the world of Jesus. Very, very important realities in the landscape of his world. I mean, look at Paul. In the letter to in Ephesus, he stands and he makes his great speech against the people that we fight, who they're not flesh and bone, they're principalities and powers in high places, and not flesh and bone. And he does that in the great city of Ephesus, where there is the great temple of the goddess Artemis, a great center of these things, and where he stands when he looks east and he looks west, from China all the way to Rome, he sees the worship of the gods. And so this character we see in all of these cultures, the sky god, he is apparently the one that we know as Zeus or Jupiter in the Greco-Roman culture, but he is in all the pantheons. He's always the head of the pantheon. The air is a very important part of its symbolism, and so is the thunderbolt. He's a sky god, kind of like Thor, kind of like Indra, kind of like Enlil, and Zeus, Jupiter. And so we are to understand that the Lord's giving an insight that this is all the symbolism of the leader, the king of the gods, the Nachash. And it seems this throne is firmly placed, I have to say, in really what we call the West. And it was there in Asia Minor, and it is now in Berlin. And the West, of course, is the most powerful industrial, economical complex of all the nations. It's more powerful than Brazil. It's more powerful even than China and Russia at the end of the day at this point. It controls, the main financial system of the world, and that's why you can just turn off the knobs if someone's being a bad boy. It has the biggest guns by far, the biggest army, the biggest technology, the biggest wealth, the biggest influence. Really, everyone, the whole world. Its calendar is the main calendar, even though other people have their own calendars. And so it's interesting as we move forward into the end of the Roman world. Well, what happens at the end of the Roman world? In the West part of the Roman Empire, Rome is slowly collapsing from within under the weight of its own corruption. And suddenly, who rises to really finish them off and become the new empire in the new world? The Germans, the Germanic tribes, the Visigoths. And the first post-Roman empire in the West is the Charlemagne Frankish Empire, the German Empire. The Holy Roman Empire is a Germanic empire. And with the Germans begins the new world, the new West. It goes from there. Rome has fallen. Eventually, Italy, Rome will be, at the time of the Renaissance, once again the fountainhead of the knowledge of civilization. It goes back to Mesopotamia and to the fallen angels. Some even carted from the world before the flood, as the library of Ashurbanipal alludes to. However, as far as the scepter of political power and military power, no, it's not going to be Italy. From the Germans, it goes for a while to the Celts in Spain, and then it comes back to the French. I mean, that's where the French get the name from, France. It is their way of saying Franks, the Frank Germanic bloodline of Charlemagne. That's where France gets its name from. The north is all Germanic. And then you have Napoleon, and Napoleon's empire is pretty much the same size as Charlemagne's. And from there you have two of these Germanic tribes, the Angles and the Saxons, and the English people. They are directly a Germanic people. And they then at the Battle of Waterloo, the very important Battle of Waterloo, the power transitions from the French now to the English. The Germanics, between the French, the Germans, and the English, the Germanic bloodline continues to dominate the Celtic one. The New World is discovered, and this new Greece, in a way, that's Europe, that's risen out of the ashes of Rome, that starts with Germany and the Visigoths and the Germanic Empire. This new world, this new civilized world, this new Greece, then seeds with its children, with its sons and daughters, the new world. So you've got the Spanish to the south and the Portuguese as well, and to the center, then you have the English and the French, and in the north. And in the United States, I think last I checked the statistics, 61 or 66% of the people in the statistics Czech origin and 30% German origin. Some say the German origin is higher. People hit because of world wars, they changed their names or they hid their identity. I don't know. But between the German and English, most of the genetic stock of the United States is Germanic. And so you've got this huge influence that starts after the fall of Rome. And where does it start? Well, let's go back to stand in our backyard and dream. Let's put our house down, our tent down in a new land and look west. Rome is now the thing that started in Asia Minor and Persian Greece grew to become Greece, grew to become Rome, and that's kind of now fallen. And a new reality is going to begin, and you're going to put your tent in the German backyard, and you're going to look now west. And now you see before you your new territories, Europe and the Americas. And is that why the altar is in Germany? Because like the Pergamum, it has a father-like place in history. This is where the West, the new West, began after the fall of Rome. It began with the rise of the Germanic tribes. It is the beginning of the new world, in a way, as the way that Pergamum was the beginning of where the territory of the Prince of Persia stopped and the Prince of Greece started. So this is a very vast territory. And I think maybe that's why the altar is in German. It has the same type of a place in history as Pergamum did. And it's I think significant to realize that, because it means that it's possible actually that the Antichrist would rise actually therefore from this most advanced, industrial, and powerful, the Germans were the most industrial nation of the world at the time of World War II. And it was the technology that was taken from them that gave rise to the American and Soviet world. And so between Berlin and eventually as the power shifted towards Washington, D.C., this is where the top science is. This is where all the crafty knowledge is. This is where the big money is. This is where, the presidents that have the most influence among all the nations exist. So there is a kind of a descent of Berlin and the rise of DC as after World War II. And then there's, of course, the dominance of English as an international language. I mean, even the Beatles sang in an American accent. That's crazy. Even the Beatles sang in an American accent. So this is the world that rises after World War II, and there's a lot of Masonic presence in DC, and Albert Pike says that that it was chosen as the place to plant the new Atlantis, and it's safe. It's across the ocean. It's hard to get to. You've got the big land of Canada and the North Pole on one side, and you've got two oceans, and you've got all this territory in the south. It's in a safe place in some ways. So it's a good place to start something. So I really find it interesting that this altar is associated also with the most powerful nations of the world and their colonies, essentially, which grew to become very powerful. And of course, this is all just, I'm going with it as the Lord has brought me back to research this. And I'm really looking for the first time, I'm actually seeing that the story that's recorded on the altar, on the burnt offering place, all of these things are very important. There's a message coming to us in the place of Pergamum, because, there's a lot happening here. And I do advise that people Google Jonathan Cahn talking about this altar, because he's looking at what's happening since the altar has been unearthed in the modern world. and he's making some incredible points that are very interesting. So looking at this, suddenly I'm starting to think, wait a second, this is interesting. You look at the dream of King Nebuchadnezzar, and on one of his legs there's 5 toes. Well, what happens after the fall of Rome in the West? If the altar is here, and this is a very important, powerful place in the world, the West, well, the Germans rise first with Charlemagne, then the Spanish rise. There's the Portuguese, there's the French, and then there's the English. If you count it that way, you got 5. If you see the Spain as being encompassing the Portuguese, then you have the English Empire as being the 4th one, and you have America as 5. But you've got 5 possible toes here that rise out of the West. And it starts with the Germans, and it still is the dominant place in the world. It's possible that this is the new Rome. America's the new Rome in that sense, and you've got Europe, which is the new Greece. Now, there's 2 symbology is very important to the fallen angels. They love their symbols, and they splatter it everywhere, and they love to communicate by it. One symbol that appeared on the euro, which was very interesting, was the story of Zeus as a bull lifting Europa out of the sea. And this is very interesting, because if Zeus is in fact Satan, Europa was a princess, and Europe, the continent, is named after her. And you have this, idea of Zeus lifting Europe out of the sea. And then you have the royal eagle of Zeus, Aetos Dios, eagle of Zeus, one of the most important symbols of Zeus. And where do you see this eagle? Well, look at the Nazis, look at the Romans. Look at America. The eagle is there. So wherever the eagle is, I see now, if these guys control the world and they're very proud of their own, themselves, they don't just allow symbols to appear on flags and things because it's nice and a bunch of guys sit around and say, hey guys, eagles are powerful, they're mighty, they've got big, powerful beaks. Why don't we put that on our sign? It'll mean like we're, strong people. No, these are all this, the crescent of the moon, the symbol of the sun. In Berlin, in the same museum, you have the gates of Ishtar or the Queen of Heaven. So this is not a coincidence that we have these symbols in these Western powers. And I think that's important. Zeus lifting Europe out of the sea, the symbol of the eagles. So we'll have to see what happens now that we've gone through the 2 world wars, now that we've gone through the Holocaust, now that we've gone through the Soviet reality. Now the altar sits once again in Berlin. And are there, I don't know, sometimes I imagine, secret societies go there at night. I mean, you got to look at this building. You got to Google it. The center of the building where the altar is, it really looks like a temple, not like a museum. And these guys, and I'm looking into them right now to see who they were, they get together and they petition the authorities that are going to build a place to house this altar. And they say, absolutely, absolutely, we have to build a place that can fit the altar 1-1. We want to reconstruct it, and we have to build a building that can actually fit it. This wasn't done before, and there was resistance. People were like, no, why would we spend the money? Like, that's crazy. Why would we do that? And these guys were like, no, we have to do that. And they eventually got their way. And in 3 years, they built this building, and they put the altar up. And Hitler's architect goes in there and says, I love this altar. And he builds a massive version of it, and Hitler declares the Holocaust from it. So this is interesting because it's possible that we are getting ready for the kinds of events that we have seen in Hanukkah, that Paul talks about, Rav Shaul, that there will be this man standing in the temple. So the culture has to be brought back to the kind of culture, and again, Rabbi Kahn talks about this, the kind of culture that the Israelites had at the time of Hanukkah, the time where Zeus attacked and made desolation, because the Lord said, once again, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the Holy of Holies, then get out of Jerusalem. So here, what we see is the kind of culture that Israel had was the kind of culture that knew God, but had gone away from God. And so this is the kind of culture that perhaps a president like President Obama brings in. after he stands in the makeshift model of that altar and does his inauguration speech in 2008 and begins to roll back, these Judeo-Christian values. And again, I'm not making a political statement. I'm just stating facts. If the Republicans did something like that, I would say, oh, and they did this. I'm just, saying that these are the facts. And so I don't have a dog in that race. I don't even live in the States. So this whole reappearing may be pointing to the rise of a new Atlantis, because when I look back at that altar in Pergamum, where it was and where it is right now in Berlin, and look at what's depicted on it, what I see is that the Nephilim empire of the fallen angels is destroyed by God at the flood. And then there's this ambition to rebuild that one world government and again put a Nephilim of Satan as its ruler. And this is what I see on the altar when it says Zeus claims order out of chaos and judges these troublemakers, the Titans, and reestablishes order through his empires, these succession of empires. It is all leading to the final one, to the one that brings it all together. And this is the one that I think we're headed towards, and I think that is ultimately the reason this altar has reappeared out of the ashes of the ground and has been reconstructed. And there it is again, this very altar that the Lord himself points to in the letter to the Pergamum and identifies it as the throne of Satan. So when the book of Revelation says the liberty to the beast, and he says to the Lord, I have dominion over all the kingdoms of the earth, and I can give authority to whoever I will. This is the final authority giver, and I think this has come back because it's like, it's time. The seat, the throne, the altar that on it has recorded Zeus as the giver of authority, of order, of empire out of the chaos of the flood, not God. That altar that makes that statement, which is actually a political statement, the ambition, Zeus will bring again order to this world like he did in the world before the flood. That altar has appeared because he's getting ultimately ready to make that happen. And I think despite all of these attempts of destroying Israel, why is it that Satan keeps rising? Well, because the throne of David is the only throne that, according to heaven, has legitimacy on earth as a seat of rulership representing God, the God of gods. Only the throne of David. And so there's a war against this throne, and I think that's what the Holocaust was about. Stop this from happening. Destroy, as we march forward towards the fulfillment of prophecy, destroy this and put your own guy on the throne of the world. This is what I think perhaps the rise of anti-Semitism, of the pogromists, the rise of the atheist empire, the rise even today of what's happening in the world, which is not just a Muslim thing. The anti-Semitism is in the United Nations. It's in every country. It's in many churches. There is definitely a spirit that says, let's stop the throne of David from actually happening. And this is what I think the Führer was about. We will crown our own guy and we will endow him. You look at the story of Hitler. I mean, Nazism was a religion. Hitler was a religious man in his own pagan system. And again, the altar is in the background. So I think this is going to be the age of the Antichrist. And I think ultimately that is why the altar has reappeared. It's all of these attempts on the way to slow it down, to stop it. But ironically, of course, everything moves us closer to it. Even the Holocaust is what made the nation come to life, because now suddenly the world for a moment gathered and said, oh, this was horrible. And people were motivated to go back who didn't care much for this. So I think this is why it's appeared on the stage of history once again. And I think definitely there's enough evidence from the past, from the present, from what's on it, from what's in Scripture, from all that's happened between the Greco-Roman world and the Temple of Jerusalem and the line of David and all that's happened since this altar has reappeared and what the Lord is pointing to. I think it's conclusive. I think we can say that this is the throne of Satan. This altar is what the Lord was alluding to when he said in the letter to Pergamum, I know where you live, where the throne of Satan is, where Satan dwells.
Now, with this topic, the Germans, when they were uncovering this altar to Zeus, there was a massive influx of esoteric knowledge and them practicing just dark rituals and all this kind of weird, funky spiritual stuff that came with the rise of the Nazi regime. Do we kind of see this same interest in the esoteric religions and the mystery religions with this uncovering in the modern day? Are we going to see a revival of people who want to practice these ancient religions because they have this icon of this altar at Pergamum?
Yeah, and that's why I think it's going to lead to the false prophet, who's going to be their prophet, because it's going to be, people are going to be actually very spiritualized in a dark way in the corridors of political power. I believe now in the Western world, where the altar is, and where the great power is. So I think that we should look for that, because the Bible talks about signs and wonders, lying signs and wonders performed by these guys. And I think that's because the UFO phenomenon, fits into that. That's the modern face of the fallen angels, like we established in 2006. And UFOs, angels, and gods. They're no longer the gods of the ancient world. They're the new gods of the modern world, or aliens. So that's part of it. To the people who are perhaps more spiritually minded, both in the West and in the Muslim world, they'll appear as ascended, masters. They'll appear as holy beings. The Masons call them the unknowable ones. So they're just like these, spiritual realities. But it's these guys, the fallen angels call them that. The Elohim, the Bene Ha-Elohim, the Watchers. So these are the names they have, and other names. Definitely, there are people in the halls of power that are part of the secret societies. They do in all the universities, starting with Harvard. All the universities have secret societies. Their buildings are huge. They are very wealthy. They're there. Their names are there. But people are not allowed inside. A select few are allowed to go inside. The Skull and Bones, perhaps, is the most famous one of them all. It always has 7 members, and only 7 members, going back to the heptathic, the 7 sages of like the Magi's and the 7 sages of the ancient world. That there's already a lot of these guys who go to these secret societies, and then they get elected in the Congress, in the Senate, and it's incredible if you compare the list of people that are in political power. So I think they are getting all kinds of inspiration, and I think that they kind of wait. They're conditioned. They're told, you wait, and then one of these guys makes himself known to one of us, who's a very, very high-ranking individual. And he will tell us what we need to do, and then we'll give it down the line. It'll come down, the command will come down the line. Then you have other spiritual leaders in the world. I mean, most of the Muslim world, the Middle East, has people in power who are religious, who worship something, who pray something, who receive messages, who get inspired. So the world, even secularism, really, is it secular? I mean, why is it that where it says the new secular order on the dollar bill, there's a religious symbol? Because it's not secular in that sense. It's a makeshift paradigm that it makes it look like it's not religious, but it's a religion, actually. And so this spirituality is very much present in the halls of power. In India, there's very much a Hindu party that is in power. And, it's part of their culture. They're Hindus. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying good. I'm just saying that there are people that are there. I was born in Iran. There are people in power in Iran that have religious beliefs. They actually have their own way of understanding what's happening in the world, and their own understanding of where it's all going based on their religious beliefs. So I think it's very much present already for some force to tap into. And yes, we should be looking for the rise of that. Like you say, we should be seeing a peak, a spiking, and I think that leads to the false prophet, which then points to the new Führer and says, this is now the new Führer. And really, I got to say, this is this thought that's really come to me. I'm realizing it's also simple. The world it's just not going to follow a guy that speaks English with a thick German accent. He doesn't have that appeal on the masses of the world. Believe it or not, because of rock and roll and because of Hollywood and because of some ideals even of freedom and liberty and prosperity and capitalism, the world as a whole does somehow kind of look up and is under the spell of American culture. That really is actually true. And as I said, even the Beatles had to sing in English, in American English, in Yankee English, in order to see themselves as, international musicians. That is where the imagination of the world is today. That is the new Greece. That's the new Rome. That's the new, popular place you look up to. So suddenly I'm realizing it's so simple. It's really a Russian guy, not so much. A Chinese guy, no. A Muslim guy is going to read the world. No. German guy, no. I mean, you need more than one person. You need a coalition of maybe 10, whatever. But I think that actually, ironically, still, the presidency of America carries a huge influence if the guy is kind of all-inclusive, kind of like Obama. That kind of a guy is more like, has the values that somehow is very a la mode and very enlightened in today's world. So I don't know, I'm starting to think it's so simple. It's as simple as that. Oh, that's the culture that has the sway that all people could kind of like fall behind. That's just the reality of the world. So maybe it's as simple as that, We'll see. But the West is where the altar is, and that's not a coincidence.
It was very fascinating how you kind of traced the presence of this altar in the various cultures throughout history. Of course, it landing here in the Western world, the United States, with finally Obama being like, all right, I'm going to prop this thing up and get inaugurated in front of it and have everybody chat, yes, we can. Yes, we can. And,
yeah.
And
is that his accent? Yeah.
Well, I've tried as hard as possible. I'm not very good. I've been known to butcher accents on here. You can see me try to do Donald Trump. But whenever we see kind of the transplant that takes place after World War II with all the high-ranking Nazi scientists transplanted into the United States,
exactly.
You can absolutely see a transfer of power, a transfer of focus for kind of the evil workings of the world. It was once focusing on Germany, and then it kind of transfers over to the Western world, to the United States. And you said something that was very interesting to me, that these people in these high-ranking secret societies, these secret cults, they are just told to basically wait. And I was always of the opinion that at any time Satan is prepared to to plant a antichrist figure. Of course, in World War II, we have like a Hitler, and throughout history, it's almost like he always has somebody ready to step in and fill that role, to fill the boot, so to speak. And so you can definitely see that with the United States being the epicenter of military power across the world, the epicenter of economic prosperity and all of that, that the focus is here on the United States. And so many people, they wonder, what role does the United States have in biblical prophecy? And you can't help but to ask that question, especially when we're talking eschatology, we're talking Book of Revelation stuff. We are too big to not have some kind of role. And that's not a boastful statement. That's just a matter of fact. All nations have been influenced by the American culture, just like you've said, in some form or fashion. So where are we in the good book? Where are we in the, in the timeline of events? Because
I don't know. I feel the eagle is there. And I think that suddenly I'm like thinking, oh, the reason I haven't been seeing it, because I've been thinking, okay, well, all these countries attack Israel. And where is America? Why doesn't America come to the rescue? I mean, isn't that crazy? And now I'm thinking, whoa, what if it's led by America? That's why it actually requires the Messiah to come. There is no one left on the side of Israel. All the great powers unite finally against Israel. And that is when the Son of David has to come. And so it's like, whoa, that's been, I'm sharing this with you, but this is just something I'm digesting now, with the altar being in Berlin and realizing that out of this thing that started with Germany and became Europe, eventually led to America. That's where what started with the fall of Rome and the rise of the Germanic led eventually to America, to DC. That's where it flowered. That's where it culminated. Unless there, and now culturally, I thought, well, okay, well, America maybe could get weakened. Maybe that's what 9/11 was all about. Make America more a country, a powerful country, but one among other powerful countries. So now it's possible to have a coalition. And now that coalition has a leader, and America is one of those countries. And I thought that's also possible. But I think the leader of that coalition must be, I think, an English-speaking American. He's the only guy who's got the cultural thing that, we're not going to follow a German leader, not yet, because the world can change, of course, and a new generation can rise, and I don't know, maybe Germany will become hip, but right now I don't see it that way. Suddenly, I'm thinking it's actually quite simple. There is only one culture that has the kind of sway that can have an international appeal. So we'll have to see, or America falls in line and becomes a coalition with 10 other countries or 9 other countries, or America is the leader of this coalition, and it's out of DC, where all this Masonic, symbolism is in the city, like it's incredible, and Philadelphia, of course, where a lot of the spiritual, knowledge of the Masons and the Scottish Rite and all that stuff is. We'll see. I don't know. Suddenly, I'm seeing America in a new light, and that's it's interesting. But I'd have to say Berlin or DC. These two definitely have a very important place to play, I think, in what's coming. Definitely, you look at the altar in the city of Pergamum, and it's the Greco-Roman world that emerges. And if now I put the altar among the Germans and I look at the beginning of the Europe and in the colonies in the Americas, that's what emerged. That's the new Greece. That's the new Rome. And the altar was in Pergamum, but Athens rose. The altar was in Pergamum, but Rome rose. So the altar can be in Berlin, and yet another city may rise to be its scepter of military might and political might, and where the emperor sits and where the wealth is. And right now, I think, as it stands at this moment in time, then DC and the wealth of America is the most of all of the Western nations where the altar sits. So unless there's a change at this point, I have to say it could come from that, and it's the only country that has this cultural sway. But again, it's very important for me to say, this is conjecture. This is just like we're having a conversation. We're kind of following the train of some thought. It's not like this is what the Lord revealed or this is the Bible. This is we're just having a conversation and throwing this idea out on the air now that we understand that this altar is quite important. It is alluded as the throne of Satan, and it sits in the Western world. Okay, we need to digest that information and start thinking, what are the implications of such an important thing being in this neck of the woods? It must mean something. And it just so happens that this neck of the woods is the most industrial, the wealthiest, and the most powerful.
Yeah, all of those, they definitely can perk your ears up when you're thinking eschatology, end times events. And it's never hurtful to, offer conjecture. As long as we're not setting dates, it's wise to put all the cards on the table and just be like, all right, what do we got to look at? What can we kind of get?
Well, you look at things like the mark of the beast and the fact that Christians are going to be, arrested and killed and all that stuff. And I used to think, well, that can happen here because, Christians have a lot of sway in the government and there's these certain, laws that are so embedded in our, law governments that here we would never do that. Well, what if the government here went like happened in Germany? I mean, was Germany not an industrial modern nation and suddenly went for 7 years? It's the rise of a satanic thing. It's not a rational thing. Well, if it happened in the West, then yes, Christians could be rounded up who don't receive a mark, an electronic mark that connects them to some worldwide thing. Now, what is all of this? We still don't know, but suddenly it's possible, and that puts a new twist. It's not like we're here in the safe havens looking at the epicenter of the apocalypse. We be very much, in its epicenter ourselves. So we'll have to see how it plays out. What else can I tell you about this altar? So we covered Hitler, Obama, and Albert Speer, the architect. the whole story leading to Hanukkah, and how the Lord says, when you see the abomination of desolation, get out of Jerusalem. And the story of Hanukkah becomes a type of the end times. The Lord makes that happen, and it is the culture of Zeus that conquers the temple. It is the culture of Zeus that destroys the temple in 70 AD. It is the gods of Rome under the leadership of Jupiter that persecute the disciples of Yeshua for 400 years, culminating, as we put in the documentary, with Diocletian. This Roman emperor, he sends a messenger to Apollo, the sun god, and he says to him, he's known as Shams in the Mesopotamian pantheon, what should I do with the Christians? And they say, well, the oracle of Apollo at Delphi says the Christians are the enemies of the gods. He says, fine. He says that from now on, the emperor of Rome says that the rights of citizens who are Christians is suspended. You have no more rights as a Roman citizen. They are to be arrested. The Bibles are to be burnt. And these guys are to be tortured until they sacrifice to the gods or die. And he kills, Diocletian, by decree of Apollo, more Christians than all the other 9 periods of Roman persecution combined. That's why historians refer to it as the Great Persecution. So this empire of Jupiter leads to all of these things, and now this altar is back, and I think it's because we're going to see the rise, ultimately, of the Antichrist, since that's the name that he's the most known as, that guy. And I think that's where it's back. And I think the reason it's in the West is because I think he may rise out of the West.
I have heard something somebody shared with me the other day that the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, Levi, and Judah, they had their Holocaust in World War II. But there's some postulation that the time of Jacob's trouble, which encompasses all 12 tribes, means that there's going to be a Holocaust for the Western nations as well. There's going to be a Holocaust, very possibly here in the United States, maybe even more severe than that of the one that was in Nazi Germany over Judah. And so I've been on a rabbit trail the past 2 or 3 months on this topic of United States in prophecy. And I know we're going to be doing a midnight ride on this particular topic. I think I found some very interesting analogies in Scripture that seem to apply to the United States as being a place that all 12 tribes of Israel very likely are represented in some form or fashion. They don't know their identity. They don't know who they are. But of all the nations, the United States is absolutely the smeltering pot of the nations. It is the place that claims to be the house of the Lord. We claim to be a nation that follows the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, yet in many ways we've turned our back on him. And so it's a very incredibly interesting thing, especially reading through the book of Ezekiel, where you learn that scripturally judgment begins at the house of the Lord. And who sends out the most missionaries? Who sends out the most Bibles? Who sends out, the most relief effort and all this stuff? Well, it's the United States. And in the similar way that Jerusalem was a place that all nations came up and they prospered from the prosperity that God poured out on Israel before the two houses split. In the same way, today we see the United States being a place that the whole world is blessed in. In the same way, Jerusalem was a place that all 12 tribes came together in the land of Israel and proclaimed to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In the same way, the United States, on a macro scale, is very similar to what we see with that location. And so if the United States does have a major role in biblical prophecy, and we claim to be the house of the Lord, then there's a very good chance that whenever Jacob's trouble does come, that judgment's going to begin at the people who claim to be the most Christian, or the closest adherents to the Judaic religion, the Judeo-Christian religion. And it's really frightening, because we know that there's always a remnant of believers who are keeping the testimony of Yeshua and keeping the commandments of God. Yet, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are lukewarm. There's a lot of people who, they've turned their back on the values that are laid out in Scripture. They've turned their back on a biblical faith, and really the United States as a whole has become quite a hypocritical nation. We have on our dollar, whether or not, the Masons who put "In God We Trust" on the dollar bill were referring to the God of the Bible. We still proclaim that as a nation. Our presidents proclaim this to be a Christian nation to, at least an extent. We have Donald Trump claiming to be a Christian, claiming to follow the God of the Bible. And yet, really, we've become a hypocritical nation. So, to be of the position that judgment wouldn't come to the United States is a foolish position, I feel like. And whatever role we play in end times, eschatology, in the time of Jacob's trouble, the Great Tribulation, whether it's destruction comes to the United States so that the beast system can rise out of the ashes of who currently rules the world economic playground. I don't know. I can't really say for sure, but I'm definitely been on the hunt to figure out America's role in prophecy, and I really enjoy talking about how kind of this seat of power is transferred into the Western world, and we definitely see that represented here in the United States of America.
Yeah, absolutely. This is scary, yes, but I don't want to be a fearmonger, because I do see that larger than the forces of darkness, there is the forces of light in the universe, in the creation, the Shamayim, whatever this thing is we're inside, the Shamayim and the Eretz, the heavens and the earth, and all the hosts of the heaven, and the Holy Spirit, and of course the presence of Almighty God who inhabits eternity. We are very safe, like in the bosom of a loving father, or, even I would say in the bosom of your mother. We are safe. And so it's very important to understand that in the book of Job, we clearly see that God is in complete command over the forces of darkness, and he determines what they can or cannot do. And it's very important to understand that this is just a way of saying the word of God is real. The signs and prophecies come true. We do have these writings for our generation to be a guiding light and allow us to navigate through by following God as our shepherd, who leads us to still waters, and who leads us through the floods as well, as he did Noah. And so this is kind of interesting that this is happening, and we are the sons of the one who was made in the image of God. We are the sons of God, and we have a destiny in the cosmic creation that awaits us, and the earth is the safe and sound birthplace of the sons of God, but also it is the fallen world, and so it's full of trial and tribulation and darkness. And this is kind of what's forming us. But at the end of the day, it's not a scary, let's all be afraid type of a message, because God is mighty, and he's with us, and his angels and his Holy Spirit. It's recognize the signs of the times, and let's recognize a biblical worldview. How could something so incredible happen in the Western world? How could persecution fall on the freedom-loving people of the United States like this, if that is going to happen, if this is a possibility that we should consider? For me, I think that it's really at the very, very, very end, where the Great Tribulation, the 3.5 years, where it becomes, I think at that point, maybe already presented in that galactic lie, where there's an enemy coming to the earth, and if you're within, then you're really an enemy of the emperor, who has now these other guys behind him, because they are giving him power. He says that he makes fire come from the sky, and signs and lying wonders, and so there's going to be this throne given to him, this by the dragon gives his authority to him. There's power behind him, and he may point to this power and say, these are the good guys. They have come to usher a new age. Their hybrids are among us. They're giving us, drinkable water. You want to destroy salt water and make it into drinkable water so everyone can drink cheap water. You want to destroy famine. You want to destroy poverty. These guys are going to give us the toys to do it. And those in the culture who rise and they say, no, we have this light in us. We have this word that's been given to us, that this is actually the bad guy. And the guys who are coming, who the bad guys, are the good guys. Now, an entire portion of the population can be deemed as terrorists or unfaithful to the work, to the order, or I don't know, I don't know what the term is going to be, but alien lover, I don't know what you want to call it, they're going to call us, but it's like the days of Rome, where the citizens who refused the worship of the gods and of the emperor were, cast aside and killed. So it must again come down to that kind of a reality that is bigger than the laws that govern us today, that is bigger than some president or some parliament or some Congress, passing a law, some weird law against a portion of the population. It is bigger than all of that. Something has happened in the world that's opened the story again in its biblical full-blown proportions, like the age before the flood. The sons of God, their hired offsprings, they are present, they are ruling. We are again inside of that magnificently large cosmic play that the Word of God paints. It's all come, the curtain has been removed, and we're there. And now they're saying, pick a side. And we say, we're picking the side of the guy that's on its way. And they go, well, then you're a traitor to the power of the one who's receiving power right now, and who's, look, all the great stuff he's going to be doing in the world right now. You're a traitor to the great world leader and the powers that are behind him. So at that point, a massive persecution would be warranted, because we would be the enemies of the state.
Yeah, I think it's very important, you're right, not to fearmonger, but to always remind ourselves to prepare our hearts, to remain repentant, remain at the feet of our Messiah, because,
yes,
if you're not doing those things, then, this is going to be an awful, fearful, bad time for you, because if you're not on the side of the one who's, the name above all names, then you might find yourself fighting alongside the Antichrist and his army. You might find yourself being deceived, but that's why it's so important to keep our hearts ready, to stay in the Word of God, and to run from sin, so that whenever the man of lawlessness shows up and makes you feel good about the place you're at and the place you are in, and you're in, if you have a lukewarm faith, oh, that's just fine, just follow me, that's where we don't want to be. And that's when you might want to be afraid. But if you're staying in the Word of God, if you're staying at the feet of the Messiah, then, and that's what, that's the only consolation you have, that he's got your back and he has a plan and a destiny for you in these end times.
Yeah, he loves you. I mean, when you're a parent, you realize how much you love your children. He loves you. And that love leads him to all the things you're saying. And yes, to stand at his feet and to repent and to accept that love and accept that light and accept that grace and accept the gift of fellowship with the living God and of eternal life and of forgiveness, and to walk in this new life and in the way that comes with it. This is wonderful, and it does protect us against being deceived, as you're saying, and against the lies that are coming. And it's important to know that Scripture does paint a picture that we need to understand of things in our age being very, very, in a way, different from much of history. The only age that resembles our age in all the ages of the past, and that's one thing that the Bible does, it goes into the ages of the past and says, let's see which age you live in, because there's lessons here for you. It really is like the Lord said, it will be like the days of Noah. And it was the days of this one world Nephilim empire of the sons of God, and it was judged by water. This one will be judged by fire. And I think that, yes, if Atlantis was the capital of the world before the flood, then we are headed to the rise of a new Atlantis. And that's what the throne is pointing to. So this is good to know these things, because now we know how to choose and not to be deceived. And we go, okay, well, listen, you look at the Song of Songs. This guy marries his bride, and in Jewish tradition, you go away and there's kind of a gap between the agreement to marry, which is in fact, and the consummation of the marriage, which seals the deal. He goes away in the Song of Songs, this lover, it's, he leaves his beloved, tree of love that God is describing, and he goes away, and then he comes back with an army to get his beloved. And this is, of course, the story that we're in. And the Lord's returning with his army. And it's important to understand, like, you look at the story of the two prophets that are killed in Jerusalem. And they're brought back to life on the third day, and it says everyone sees them, so I guess they're on TV. This is going to be a battle again of miracles, like the days of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. It's going to be like the days of Moses and the kind of supernatural, judgments that God released on the earth. It's going to be like the days of Hanukkah. It's going to be like the days of Yeshua, where the presence and glory of God was among us. And so this is the kind of world we're headed towards. It's not the drab, secular, rat race that we have been programmed to see the world as. And in order to understand what's going on, we need this knowledge that is coming from the Word of God to our generation. And so this is heavy stuff, and it's stuff that perhaps other generations of the church has not had to grapple with the way we do. But the Lord is really teaching us that don't be deceived. These are the realities emerging. There's these, the UFOs, the supernatural powers, the hybrids, the antichrists, the spirit of the antichrist, these dark forces, these persecutions. But then this is the story you're in, and God made you to go through this story. You're safe. Follow the shepherd of your soul, and follow him into the flood and through the flood, and follow him through the furnaces of fire, and follow him into safety by still waters and green hills, and put your hands into his hands.
Yeah, I know the prophet said they long to see these days, and to quote some from Esther, it said that you were born for a time such as this. Of all the times that our generation could come into, to life, that we're the ones living in these days, whether we're very close or 10, 20 years out, we're the ones who get to see what the prophets longed to see. So that's really, really exciting.
Absolutely. It's a blessing. It's a blessing to us. And so I think the Lord is preparing us by unveiling new knowledge for us and feeding us. And it's really wonderful. It's a source of great strength in my life to turn to him in repentance, as you say, and in love, and in prayer. And I like it. It's very energizing. It's very wonderful. It's very supportive, and it definitely teaches you to have a more blessed and successful life as well, with your family, with your friends, with your work, to have the protection of God over you. Yes, there's trials and tribulations, like James says, or Yaakov, that was his name. But then there's the God who overcomes with you.
Now, Ali, we had one question comes in that I'd like to ask you. It's how does the throne of Satan tie into the council of Yahweh? Is there a correlation between the two at all? Just wondering if you've thought about this yourself.
Well, no. There's no correlation in the sense that the council of Yahweh is made of the. Satan was one of his councils, and he was the anointed cherub, the leader of the cherubim, one of the highest order of beings, until iniquity was found in his heart, we were told. And there he was removed from the council. And that is that. But then he was given authority to the world of those who were, judged in death. Adam was judged and left for dead. That's the story of the beginning of our race. And Satan and his angels were cast out as well. And so they were cast out and put over the world of those who also were cast out. And that is where the throne comes in. He then is given authority with his angels over the nations other than Jacob that God chooses for himself. And in those nations, he is given the authority to put in the scepter of rule. And this begins with the city of Kish in the south of Iraq after the days of the flood. And it culminates in the one city that we're all talking about is going to be the one that's coming. And this throne represents that authority that is given by Satan to the emperors of the nations, the scepter of worldly rule. And so it's very specific. The council of God, from where he rules the creation, that is God and his council. And that is, of course, the seat of ultimate authority over all thrones.
Wonderful. Well, that was the only question we had in tonight. And I just wanted to thank you for coming on and diving into this topic. It's so fascinating because obviously Hitler was obsessed with the seat of Satan. Obama had a fascination with it. This altar of Zeus. and tying it in all with the book of Revelation and what we see coming prophetically, I think is very important to keep people aware, keep people paying attention, because it definitely seems to be something that these people who are obsessed with esoteric, dark, mystery religions and walking after Satan, they're obsessed with this particular throne. But we know that there's only one who is more powerful than the boogeyman himself, and that's Yeshua.
The God of gods.
Yeah.
And,
So
and
I just wanted you to share just quickly where people can find some of the material that you mentioned, the film you put out, where people can find some of your research, any of the materials that you put out.
go to thinkagainproductions.com. I'm going to be blogging all the information about the Altar of Zeus with pictures. You can have that. And look at watch the documentary UFOs, Angels, and Gods. Watch it in full. There are many different topics that come up, and then they're all put together. It's the only documentary I know out there that's a Christian documentary that has this detailed account of how hybrids are created among us, which is interesting to watch how it falls with biblical prophecy. There's Chuck Missler on it. And also, as far as the altar is concerned, please Google Rabbi Jonathan Cahn talking about the altar. He has some incredible information about the modern world that he's bringing out about this altar as well. And I wanted to bring some of the historical information tonight as well as to what's depicted on it and the role it's played in history. Just really to say this is, I think, what the Lord was referring to. And I think there are other people who are now thinking this as well. So I now am confident to say that this was from God, this that came to us in the 90s, the relationship between Zeus and Satan. Yes, there you go.
And we just had a comment from the chat that wanted to assure you it's not that we didn't have questions to ask, but we were too busy absorbing the information and listening to what you had to say to get any questions out there tonight. So they just to let you know it's because they were trying to absorb all that we were talking about.
Thank you. That's good to know. I did wonder in the back of my mind, like, maybe no one is listening tonight, or okay, well it's a lot of information. I apologize if I spoke a little bit too quickly. It's it's in my head and someone presses the on button and it's coming out. This is one of the first places, actually this is the first place that I'm sharing all of my latest research into this. So I'm kind of absorbing it myself as well. There's so much information when you just look at the city and all that happened to it that I couldn't share with you tonight, but definitely there's a lot of intentionality that's gone into Pergamum's construction by the fallen angels, and it's fascinating to see that, because I'm seeing that for the first time, and really looking in detail what's on the altar and what's recorded on it, what's written on it. I see now that definitely there was a lot of mind going behind it, and agrees with how God depicts the ambitions of the enemy to rule the world, to have the pagan knowledge and war and authority and alternative spirituality. It's fascinating. This was all there staring at us in the way it was designed.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ali, for coming on and sharing with us tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching Now You See TV. I've been your host, Jake Grant, and it's always a blessing. We had such a great turnout in the chat. Everybody's was really enjoying this episode, Ali, so I wanted to thank you again. And good night, everybody.
It was wonderful having you on the other side. It's the first time that you've interviewed me, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope we can do this again. Thank you very much, Jake.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. We end with a high five. Good night, everybody.